They usually say when you're at the bottom you can only go up, but we're digging deeper into the gates of narrative hell with the fans' choice worst Star Wars film. So what is there to say that hasn't already been said about this movie? Unlike the last movie, which was objectively good in terms of filmmaking with differing subjective opinions based on the narrative direction, The Rise of Skywalker is objectively a bad movie. Horrendously cut, and the writers didn't even try, as they were clearly trying to resuscitate ideas from The Force Awakens that Rian Johnson changed. This movie was rushed and did everything in its power to retcon The Last Jedi, which clearly shows that what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi was not planned or managed effectively to ensure Episode 9 would conclude on an overarching story. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I did struggle to say that. As I've alluded to before, I can't completely blame The Rise of Skywalker or J.J. Abrams for this because the portrayal of the story and characters in The Last Jedi was radical. But believe me, I think he could have done way better than this. You know it's bad when the actors don't even know who their characters are meant to be or what scenes are going to be in the movie. Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Adam Driver and Oscar Isaac are all brilliant actors, but at a certain point, they're only following what has been outlined in the script, and believe me, they tried. I think if J.J. Abrams was a more creative director, he could have worked with what was given to him from The Last Jedi, but at the same time, was it completely his fault? Filmmaking isn't a one-person process. The director, the writers, the head of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, they are all involved in the decision-making process as to the direction of where the films are going to go. Now, I could go over this movie in the same way I did The Last Jedi, but I don't think it's necessary, as the decisions in this film, while being bad, they weren't back-to-back law-breaking. The plot itself is much simpler to understand, and overall it's a generic story that could easily fit into the Star Wars lore. Many people, including myself, had some hope that this film would fix what The Last Jedi broke. However, all this film did was put a bandage on a deep wound which the Star Wars franchise never truly recovered from. So what is the plot of The Rise of Skywalker? Well, essentially,
somehow Palpatine returned,
and our heroes need to find a way to the Sith planet Exegol to stop his plans. Is it explained how Palpatine returned? Well, no. The only explanation we get is that the dark side is a pathway to abilities that some consider to be unnatural. Now, the idea of Palpatine returning isn't a bad idea, and in fact has already been done via cloning in the EU. However, the reason why it doesn't work here is because it wasn't remotely alluded to in the prior movies. Again, a byproduct of the lack of planning that this trilogy had. The movie involves our heroes searching for a Sith Wayfinder, which is a MacGuffin that is used to pad out the runtime, as apparently Exegol has not been charted on any star maps. Again, this has been done before with a kinda similar but not really instance with Kamino, but it does feel lazy. If you were expecting this movie to subvert your expectations, I can safely say it doesn't, so that's pretty much it for the plot section. I'm now going to move on to Finn, who honestly had an underwhelming story throughout the trilogy. The only new thing that we learn about him is that he is Force sensitive, which we already assumed from episode 7, and that he's not the only stormtrooper to defect from the First Order, which makes his situation considerably less interesting. I'm even sort of lying when it comes to him being Force sensitive, as for one, no one acknowledges that he is, and Rey can clearly sense things through the Force, so she should be able to tell. And two, he doesn't explicitly say or do something to show that he is. Apparently during the quicksand scene, that's when he was going to tell Rey he was Force sensitive, but for some reason he kept it to himself the entire time, and the only other time he uses it is to find the navigation tower on the Star Destroyer, which honestly could have been chalked up to dumb luck. Also, seeing as she wasn't heavily featured in this film, Rose is still around, but she doesn't do anything and presumably doesn't love Finn anymore because that entire plot point is never explored in this movie. Honestly, I'm glad because it was kind of weird. I'm pretty sure this was due to the backlash that her character was getting at the time for being quote-unquote annoying, but to briefly share my own opinion on her, I think she's a fine addition, but again was just not written the best. Overall, Finn's story within this trilogy was very disappointing, and I'm hoping if they ever bring this character back, they do John Boyega and his character justice. Now, Poe's actually a funny character because we learn the most about his character in this movie. In The Last Jedi, he was put in a strange situation with authority, but in this one, it's like they adapted this character based on his negative traits within the last movie. Want to know why he was so rebellious and disruptive? It's because Poe was actually a YN from the hood that was drug dealing and hot wiring cars. I also like the idea that he wasn't entirely comfortable being in charge, which is why he appointed Finn as his co-general after Leia's death. He even lost all of his confidence during the attack on the Final Order, which showed a healthy level of vulnerability. Speaking of Leia, I don't have much to say about her due to the unfortunate passing of Carrie Fisher, which actually happened before The Last Jedi came out. They had to reuse scenes from The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi to make new scenes with Leia, which you can clearly tell with the line delivery and stiffness from how the scenes are filmed. I won't blame any of the filmmakers for this because this was out of their control. However, you can tell this was a major narrative setback going into this film, as I'm assuming they always wanted Leia to be the one to mentor Rey, which would make sense as to why they killed off Luke in the last film. Also, side note, the fact that Chewbacca and Lando are the only main characters left from the original trilogy is quite sad, as it highlights the missed potential of the original trilogy characters getting one more reunion together. The only narrative decision I did like with this direction was a scene where Chewie drops to his knees and cries after finding about Leia's death. Although he can't talk normally, you can empathize with his pain as his last close friend has left him all alone to support the next generation. I think it hits harder because Chewie has been around since the Clone Wars, so he's probably experienced so much death in his lifetime. Moving on, we have the last two heavy hitters in Rey and Kylo Ren, who unfortunately are still poorly written. Starting with Kylo, his motivations in the film are quite shallow at best. He, for some reason, finds the Sith Wayfinder to travel to Exegol, where he finds Palpatine and then joins forces with Palpatine after finding out that he was the one orchestrating everything, including Snoke. They make it clear that Kylo is attempting to use Palpatine as a means to his own ends, but what did he expect would happen after he helps Palpatine, one of the strongest Sith Lords of all time? Palpatine gives him the task of killing Rey, and he accepts it willingly, knowing that this man corrupted his grandfather and manipulated him using Snoke. Like, this whole interaction screams, we need to get the story moving somehow. This regression, alongside the mask regression as Kylo repairs his mask that he destroyed in The Last Jedi, shows that J.J. Abrams clearly didn't agree with the vision of making him the main villain or letting the past die. They even revisit Vader's burnt mask and the impact of his and Rey's lineage, as he's the one to reveal that she's a Palpatine and their forced dyad was created due to their bloodlines and not Snoke/Palpatine as was previously stated in the last film. Honestly, I understand why this was done, but from a pure narrative standpoint, this was just poor writing. Kylo's whole arc within the last movie just got completely undone, also that he could have a generic redemption arc by the end of the film. As for the Rey reveal, I'll save that for the Rey section. Kylo's redemption finally comes at the end of one of the lightsaber battles of all time. Literally, it was just super generic and looked bad, which causes him to drop his lightsaber and Rey to stab him with it. Rey then senses Leia as well and heals Kylo before leaving him on the Death Star remains. He then starts hallucinating Han Solo, who essentially confirms that Kylo is dead and Ben Solo is now back, which results in him throwing away his lightsaber into the sea. Now, I want to talk about this whole chain of events, starting with the lightsaber battle, as that's something I need to address in full. Disney Star Wars has the worst lightsaber battles out of the whole series, and it only gets worse when you get into the TV shows, but that'll be saved for another time. Well, I've heard that Acolyte's lightsaber battles are good, but you know what I'm saying, I'll have to get around to watching that eventually. Technically, there's been 3 lightsaber duels if you're counting the one with Luke and Kylo, but out of the 2 that involved Rey and Kylo, they have been underwhelming. The Force Awakens lightsaber battle was justified due to the lack of training from Rey and Kylo's injury, but this one in Rise of Skywalker just follows the worst Star Wars dueling practices. None of them clearly fight with any form as they swing wildly and flip their lightsabers like they're doing a bad impression of Starkiller. They also start using the Force to block lightsaber strikes, which I absolutely hate in Disney Star Wars. Don't get me wrong, an incredibly stronger character like Vader doing it to an Inquisitor is fine, but it doesn't belong in major fights. Not only is it disrespectful to what came before, but it shows a lack of passion from Lucasfilm as a whole, because the stunts pulled in the prequel trilogy required the actors involved to train and learn from fight choreographers in order to get the duels that we did in the prequels. Clearly Lucasfilm isn't that interested in evolving this section of Star Wars, and they believe that the average customer won't care if these scenes are of quality or make sense, which is very unfortunate. Moving back to Ben, this sequence of events for his character was fine, but very rushed and it felt unearned. I like the fact that he technically won the fight, which gave him some credibility, but they took it away with him being distracted by Leia's death. It's actually a good callback to the last movie, as he wholeheartedly did love Leia, but I feel like this fight should have ended at most in a stalemate manner. Also, the hallucination scene with Han felt very desperate, as JJ clearly realized that there wasn't a way to solidify his redemption without the conflict from his parents being resolved. Seeing as he killed off Han in the first movie, and he knows that becoming a Force Ghost is an extremely rare ability, he chalked up the Han return to one of Ben's memories, which does the job, but it would have been better if Han just survived up until the rise of Skywalker. After this, he pretty much becomes a generic hero and ends up sacrificing himself to save Rey's life using Force Heal. I'll be honest, his ability to now use Force Heal doesn't make sense, but we'll get to that. And he ends up dissolving into the Force, which I guess could imply that the Skywalkers have a natural ability to do this. Again, in my humble opinion, this entire redemption for Kylo was unearned. Not only that, in my humble opinion, this was the worst thing that they decided to do in this movie. Maybe the second worst thing, but we'll get into that. It would have been way more interesting if Rey died and Ben had to deal with the consequences of his actions. Potentially his arc could have been similar to Sasuke's, where he ends up roaming the galaxy to find ways to better protect it, involving himself in everyday lives to find out what the average person in the galaxy is struggling with. I'm essentially saying he could have been a Jedi Sentinel. With everything he's gone through, light and dark, it would have been way more interesting to see what he would have done past this movie. It would have fit his character arc and could have honestly been a good way to subvert the audience's expectations rather than what Rian Johnson did. Ben is massively flawed with multiple avenues to grow from, whereas Rey, especially during this movie, continued to show why people were complaining that she was too powerful. Which leads me on to Rey Palpatine's character arc, where she essentially goes from wanting to know her heritage in the previous movies to running from it. This whole storyline of her heritage gets brought back into the picture due to the backlash that she got in The Last Jedi, but rather than keeping it consistent, they gave her the most logical cop-out to justify her power. I like the fact that they at least showed her training with Leia, but I still believe that by this point they should have just went with what Rian Johnson had portrayed her as. She shows signs throughout the movie that she's flirting with the dark side, such as using Force Lightning accidentally, receiving visions of her on the Sith throne, her being aggressive towards Kylo and Palpatine, but she doesn't go deeper than this. Again, this is another missed opportunity, as this could have justified Ben's constant losses in the series if he was still redeemed, or Finn's Force sensitivity, as this plot point could have gave a justifiable reason to have Finn train as a Jedi, so he could confront Rey and maybe Kylo. What's even worse about her portrayal is that she's then given the Force Heal ability, which for those of you that don't know, in the lore, this ability is meant to be super difficult to master. Even Anakin struggled with this and couldn't learn it because it's an ability that Jedi are only really good with if they have a natural affinity to it. The fact that she's Palpatine's granddaughter and has a natural affinity to one of the strongest light side abilities is baffling to me. After all of these power revelations, she attempts to pull a Bill Skywalker and becomes a hermit, but Luke Skywalker stops her and confronts her. Now, a lot of people will say that JJ retconned The Last Jedi's portrayal of Luke, but he actually doesn't, as Luke clearly states at the end of the movie that he won't be the last Jedi, which implies he trusted the Jedi to Rey. His portrayal now, I guess you could say, is character whiplash, as he went from a literal space hobo to Jedi Master Luke in the span of one movie. I like this because the portrayal is much more faithful. The only nitpick that I have is the way that the Force Ghosts interact with the real world, as Yoda can summon lightning and Luke can apparently catch a physical lightsaber, implying that they can literally help Rey fight Palpatine, but I'll let that slide. Speaking of Palpatine, let me just explain to you guys what his plan was in the entire trilogy. So the First Order was essentially a front to control the galaxy, while Palpatine prepared the Final Order at Exegol, which was his Star Destroyers that had the Death Star cannons on them. Yes, I hate this addition to the lore, but at least it's better than the Holdo maneuver. He was then going to use the Final Order to subjugate the galaxy and continue the empire that he lost back in the original trilogy. Snoke was just a puppet / clone that he created that was used in place of himself to run the First Order. As for Rey, even though he claimed that he wanted her dead, He actually wanted her to find Exegol so she could kill him in a Sith ritual, and he could use something similar to essence transfer in order to take over her body and live longer. So all I want to know is, why did he even bother with the First Order? Why even tell Kylo to kill Rey? Why didn't you just hire a real bounty hunter to capture Rey as a child? Also, the whole idea of Palpatine's body being a sacrifice to take over Rey's body just seems stupid because at the end of the film he dies anyways. He dies to his own force lightning, which honestly made my nose bleed a little bit over how stupid this scene was. The man that orchestrated the Clone Wars and the Galactic Empire sat there and died to his own force lightning. Like, make it make sense. Another thing that makes this disappointing is that during these events, Rey gets empowered by all the Jedi that came before her, which gives her the power to deflect his lightning, I guess? Palpatine also claims that he's all of the Sith, which creates many weird questions which I've got to start at the top with. For one, the Force doesn't work the way that is portrayed in this movie, with Emperor Palpatine being all of the Sith and Rey being all of the Jedi. The Sith are more likely to hoard their power at various relics, which is what could cause the rise of the Sith again if an unexpected Force sensitive came across their teachings. The Jedi also can't communicate to the living after death unless they've become a Force ghost, and most of these characters are not Force ghosts. So are they saying this literally or figuratively? Secondly, does this make Rey the Chosen One? I had to bring it up because she disintegrates Palpatine and destroys the Sith. Technically, this would fit the requirements, which completely breaks the law of Star Wars because the Chosen One prophecy is completely wrong now. It also makes the Skywalker family a bunch of losers and failures, while painting the Palpatines as successful conquerors and world savers. It's almost like they're stronger than a family that was chosen by the Force. Briefly to touch on Rey and Ben's dyad and her revival, the dyad is a good idea but overall isn't fleshed out as much as you would like it to be. Her revival with Ben's Force Heal again breaks the law as he uses it like it's an easy ability, but the part I wanted to talk about is why he died. They state at the start that her healing abilities transfer life force, so I'm assuming Ben transferred his whole life force to Rey, which would make sense if that's how Force Heal actually worked, but I'm just going to assume that this is another ability. Also, side note, rather than her deflecting the Force lightning using the lightsabers, she should have just went full Force Unleashed and deflected it with her hands, which would have explained better as to why she died. And it could have been a callback to the way Luke was being electrocuted in the Return of the Jedi. Finally, the galaxy is saved and Rey travels to Tatooine to bury both Luke and Leia's sabers. A random traveler asks for her name, she looks over to the side and sees Luke and Leia smiling at her in approval. She looks back and says,
Rey Skywalker.
Yeah, completely unearned and really goofy. So that's the train wreck of the Rise of Skywalker, which left all of the Skywalkers dead and very little hope for the future of the series. There's nothing more to say other than this movie is really bad, but it tried its best to be a good Star Wars movie, which I don't think it completely failed at, but oh man, this film felt like Frankenstein's monster. The reason why I've gone so in depth with this trilogy is because this trilogy embodies the modern failures of the Star Wars franchise. Some highs, a lot of lows, even a movie that was genuinely good in Rogue One, but it falls outside of the trilogy and into the section of post-George Lucas original trilogy content. Also, Solo was a thing, but I've never watched that, so I'm ignoring it. There was so much potential in the sequel era, but the lack of planning for the future, narrative direction, and passion which made the prequels and original trilogy loved the way it is today is abundantly clear. As you'll see in a sec, both prequels and the original trilogy have flaws, but the passion and care that were put into these two trilogies shine through those flaws, which is what led to the fans eagerly awaiting for future adventures.